The Francis Trigg Library was started in 1598 in Lincolnshire when Shakespeare would have been 34 years old. It was the same year that Shakespeare's quarto editions of Henry IV Part 1 and Love Labour's Lost was published. It was also the year that Shakespeare and his friends financed the Globe Theatre. The Norwich City Library was started in 1608, and there were early town libraries like Ipswich and Bristol started in 1612 and 1615. All of these were started during the life of William Shakespeare in and around London, where he would have been living and working. Now, these are not public libraries in the sense of what you think of today, where they're big buildings where you go and you can check out the book with a library card. There were public libraries, and actually, the Bodleian Library at Oxford University was one of the first public libraries where anyone who wanted to come and learn could come and learn there. However, the majority of libraries during Shakespeare's lifetime would have been what's called a private library, and it's basically someone who was smart and intelligent or of high standing that wanted to show off that they were learned would collect books and manuscripts and keep them at their home. And so they would have private libraries. Thomas Plume was one of the first public libraries, and basically how he started his private collection of over 8,000 books just got so large that he turned it into a library. His library was one of the largest in England and one of the oldest even in Europe. Trinity Hall Library was started in 1600. Trinity Hall Library was started in 1600 in Cambridge, England. Hereford Cathedral Library was founded in Hereford, England in 1611. And perhaps what I think is the most interesting library as it relates to Shakespeare was that the Earl of Worcester's library was actually built in between the 15th and 17th century. So basically during Shakespeare's lifetime, the Earl of Worcester established a library at Raglan Castle in Wales. This connects to Shakespeare because Henry Percy was the Earl of Worcester in Shakespeare's plays. You'll remember the Earl of Worcester as being mentioned as the traitor in Richard II, and again in Henry IV Part 1. He was painted very badly, and all accounts are like most humans. Some people think he was really a traitor, and other people think he was a brave man skewered by Shakespeare's play. Whatever your personal opinion of the Earl of Worcester, you can see that Shakespeare knew of the history of this position. He knew about the Earl of Worcester's, he knew about their role in the history of England, and the fourth Earl of Worcester was alive during Shakespeare's time and appeared at court. He was actually the Lord Privy Seal for James I. And so you'll know James I was a patron of Shakespeare. The playing company called the Kingsmen was called the Kingsmen because they played for King James I. And the fourth Earl of Worcester worked for King James I. So when they had those big gatherings called holding court that King James would do, Shakespeare would be there presenting a play, and the Earl of Worcester would be there serving as the Lord Privy Seal. So they were all in the same room, and they were networking and hanging out. Obviously, we can't know if Shakespeare actually talked to him or was friends with him or to what degree he knew him. That's not evidence that we have from history. But we do know that it's highly likely Shakespeare knew about this man, and obviously he knew enough about the position to include them in his plays. Whether or not he studied at the Earl of Worcester's library, I have no idea. But I think it's an interesting coincidence that the library was started during Shakespeare's life, and in and around the city where Shakespeare worked. Court life revolved around the attention of the monarch, and the best way to get in good or have a good position at court was to get the attention of the monarch. And you had to be unique, you had to stand out. And I believe that Shakespeare's way of standing out was to be as educated and well-read as Elizabeth expected herself to be, because if it was a standard she held for herself, it was probably something she noticed in her courtiers. That's purely conjecture, but I think it's supported by evidence in the fact that Shakespeare was learned, and he wasn't by any indication formally educated. So he was obviously living in a time when education and intelligence was something that was valued by the people of the day, certainly of the people in high standing positions. There are records of tradesmen and craftsmen and people of low standing having libraries as well. Now, most of their libraries consisted of Bibles or religious texts or even hymnals. I think there's a common Book of Martyrs that was commonly found in some of the smaller libraries, but it was definitely a culture in Renaissance England that the idea of knowing a lot was valued and respected. And it wasn't something you had to be in a class to do. It was a personal exercise of pursuing knowledge, of finding out information and gathering it together for your own personal edification. It was a value system and a culture aspect that I don't think really exists today, which I think sort of fuels the idea of people thinking that Shakespeare might not have written his own plays because they use this evidence of, well, he wasn't formally educated, but he wrote about all of these detailed information. And I think that that's a false evidence, because I think there's plenty of modern day entrepreneurs, certainly, who can be pointed to that do not have a formal education, but who do extraordinary things. But even if you don't want to go with people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs as evidence of the fact that a formal education is not necessary to accomplish great things, in the realm of writing, Jules Verne was not formally educated at a university either. He wasn't formally educated in the sciences, definitely, and he was able to pinpoint Cape Canaveral years and years before that was built. So this culture that Shakespeare was living in was one where he would have pursued personal education on his own, and the convenience and growth of libraries in and around where he was living and working suggests that, by all accounts, he really could have gone to a library to learn this information. Whether or not he actually did, well, we don't know, but certainly Shakespeare knew a lot, libraries were prevalent, and education was a priority. So it was one option available to Shakespeare for learning things, for sure. So as it turns out, this topic is huge. The idea of libraries in Renaissance England, the growth of libraries, and the golden age of libraries in the 17th and 18th century of England is massive. I had over 30 resource links that I looked into to put this together for you guys today and to tell you about libraries in Shakespeare's time. It's way more than I can cover on this video, so I'm going to put the research links over on That Shakespeare Girl blog. It's at CassidyCash.com. That's me. I'm Cassidy Cash, That Shakespeare Girl. So if you jump over there and you click on the little button that says blog, I will have the text of this conversation we're having, this lesson on libraries in Shakespeare's time. I'll have the text written up there so you can read about it, and there's some more information there that didn't come across on video that you can read in the article. And then down at the bottom, you'll be able to download the list of research links. If you want to explore this topic further, I really encourage you to. The whole development of libraries and how we transitioned from the Great Library in Alexandria, Egypt, to the Dark Ages, where there was very little information, or certainly very little flow of information, all the way up to Renaissance England, where there was a boom of libraries and information, and just that culture shift. Hopefully, together, by studying this time period, we can bring back the idea that being educated and intelligent and doing it for yourself without needing a teacher to tell you to, we can bring that back. So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode of That Shakespeare Girl and the Did Shakespeare question of, did Shakespeare study in a library? It was certainly fun researching it and putting it together for you guys. If you enjoyed it, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. And hop on over to the blog at CassidyCash.com. I've got goodies and freebies there for you guys as well when you subscribe. And there's exclusive freebie content that I only send out to email subscribers. So hopefully you're a member of that. If you are a serious Shakespearean and you really love Shakespeare and you want to take it one step further, please check out the That Shakespeare Girl membership community. For less than a few coffees a month, we have a blast. From expert interviews to virtual tours of places you can explore Shakespeare right here in the United States. It's all over there for you guys, so check that out at CassidyCash.com as well. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.